All right. Thank you everyone for sticking around right till the end. It's wonderful to have everyone here and wonderful also to be here sharing this last panel. Thank you so much, Marcus and everyone else for organising such a wonderful event, and it's been wonderful to hear from all the other speakers. So I'll introduce myself first. I'm Professor Dan Angus. I'm the Director of QUT's Digital Media Research Centre, which is one of our university level research centres here at QUT. We do a lot of research into various aspects of digital media and media in society. Myself, I'm involved in research on things like mis and disinformation, on automation, and various other kind of interesting, pieces where technology intersects society. But I suspect I might have been invited here a little bit more because I'm also a resident of East Brisbane and someone that's heavily involved in the East Brisbane State School community, including on the PNC committee, and as a volunteer for many years, and have one daughter still at the school and one that's graduated last year. And as we'll get to when we go across the panel, East Brisbane State School, if you've been reading the news, is in firing line as one of the first victims of the Olympics, this great positive Olympic thing that we're all going to be very excited about. So we'll get to that in the end, but I'm just going to go and briefly introduce across the panel, and then I'll ask the panel members to introduce themselves, their interest and relevant experience around this topic of Olympics and what Olympics can mean for a city, like ours here in Meeanjin in Brisbane. So I will go in no particular order. I want to start actually with you, Michelle. So Dr. Michelle Newcomb is here in our QUT School of Public Health and Social Work. Michelle's background is largely in housing and has been involved in housing planning and these kinds of issues. So I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, Michelle, a bit better than what I can. Nick here on my right, PhD candidate as well here at QUT in our School of Design, and was in fact the Young Planner of the Year in 2022. So someone quite very much the expertise we need to talk about urban planning as well when it comes to Olympics. On my left, I've got a couple of amazing community members that I know quite intimately through kind of being out there waving protest signs or kind of trying to get action in a positive way for our communities. So Melissa Opportunity, who's here on my left, is from the Friends of Barrambin Park. And I'll let Melissa outline the Barrambin Park and its significance in our community. And then last but not least is Austin Hughes. So Austin's another member of our East Brisbane State School PNC. In fact, he's the chair of our PNC currently, and is also an active member within our Olympic Action Group or Impact Group. So maybe I might start in the same order I've gone. And yeah, Michelle, if you want to just introduce yourself a little bit about opening thoughts around the Olympics and what it means for Brisbane, you think?
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. It's lovely to see everyone. Can people hear me? Yep. So I'm actually a social worker by trade, and you might think, well, what is a social worker here? Why would they care about the Olympics? But we know that traditionally in cities where the Olympics are held, the people who are most disadvantaged are the poor people or people who are already disadvantaged. And so that's really my fear that's going to happen here in Brisbane. And that comes also from two other places. Before I was an academic, I actually worked as a community development officer for Brisbane City Council in this area of Brisbane. So I've seen firsthand, I suppose, how that community has changed and how that community has been impacted by policy on a local, state and a federal level. And recently I've done research with West End Community House and one of my master's students. And what we did was look at the impacts of Expo 88. I think some people in this room remember that, just by looking, just a guess. But what we found with Expo 88, of course, was a lot of poor people moved out, particularly people in boarding houses. And it really was the start of that sort of what people think of as a gentrification in the area, but of course had very bad and negative impacts for a lot of people in that area. So we're really curious to see if we're going to see the same patterns, similar patterns happening over the next kind of 10 years.
Thank you so much. We'll touch on some of these issues absolutely in the coming questions. Go for it, Nick.
Yeah, thank you all. So town planning background, somewhat involved in the planning space within Southeast Queensland, including Brisbane, and that includes some precincts and that sort of considerations of the Olympics and Paralympics. Noting, I don't necessarily need to be the one to say this, but I think it's important we always say them together because it is a lot of access, including accessible housing, many of the things we'll get into with that. So basically, the way it could play out is far from guaranteed that it's going to be good for many people in our society. I think the more we talk about the ways that it could go wrong, it kind of minimizes the likelihood that it's going to go wrong in those sort of ways. So it's really important to be talking this through about all the things that could fall through the gaps and all the negative implications. There are some possibilities that, some things are going to be good, which we should talk through as well, largely about timelines of infrastructure. But yeah, there's basically you get a little bit more money, you have to spend it inefficiently. Like that's kind of what happens with these mega events. Yeah, keen to talk it through with everyone. So thank you.
Cheers, it's wonderful to have you here, and I acknowledge as well we should absolutely refer to the Olympics and Paralympics. Melissa, over to you.
Yes, I am not in any way from academia at all. My sister is a doctor, but I am not. And I've spent 25 years in tech recruitment and running recruitment businesses. So when it comes to advocacy, I have no experience whatsoever, apart from 2 years ago.
If anyone wants to
But I know how to recruit. And I know how to recruit our local community. So from 2 years ago when the Olympics were announced, we heard that the Gabba was going to be the destination for the athletics. What that meant is that Raymond Park, which is a park that I live on, it was doomed to be an Olympic warm-up track. Now that's a temporary athletics quality warm-up track that's going to be built by the government, shoehorned into what is the lung of our community, into what is now 50% of the green space in Kangaroo Point, to be built for potentially houses to be ripped down, although the government have confirmed last week that they won't be ripping down our houses. They will be creating a smaller track. But irrespective, they are removing the lung of our community in order to build a warm-up track that doesn't belong there, when all that they could do is actually move the athletics to a more suitable and sustainable and environmentally responsible position, and have the Gabba be modified for accessibility access. But the reason why they're knocking down the Gabba and rebuilding it is because an athletics track does not fit into the available space of an AFL field. So this is $2.7 billion that the government is spending where they do not have to shoehorn an athletics event into inner city Brisbane. So it's 2 years of advocacy, and I'm sure quite a number of years to go.
Yeah, before I hand to you, Austin, I want to give one bit of context, because I found this to be the most staggering piece of this entire journey, and maybe Austin, you and Mel, you might agree with me. But so you can't fit an athletics track inside the Gabba. So they're going to knock down the Gabba, rebuild it, so they can fit an athletics track. Meanwhile, the football, AFL football and cricket can't play when you've got the stadium demolished for like 10 years, so they need somewhere else to go. So the government proposed now that they're going to retrofit the athletics stadium at QE2 to be able to house cricket and perhaps AFL events, right? And retrofit that or some other kind of ground around that basically suits athletics for the time when the Olympics is done, they will convert the Gabba back from an athletics track to an AFL and cricket pitch so that we can use it for that purpose, and who knows what happens to the athletics track. Perhaps that goes back to being an athletics track where it is, right? So, yeah, like, understand the community kind of just standing here like, oh, what? No. But yeah, anyway, Austin.
Thanks, Dan. Well, thanks everyone for coming. It's a credit to everyone being here on a Sunday. So thanks for coming out and hearing our voices. But I'll out myself, right? I'm from Sydney originally. Okay, it's out there. I'm a New South Welshman. Sorry. But of course, in Sydney, in Sydney, everyone hates each other, right? It's a mean place, right? So I came up to Brisbane 13 years ago and I found this great thing. We have communities here. It's awesome. People care about each other. People talk to each other. It's unbelievable. And it's a really old-fashioned thing. It's the traditional institutions, you know, churches, sporting clubs, and schools are the heart of those communities. That's where people get to know each other, and we have that. And I found that at East Brisbane. I've never had that in my whole life in Sydney. And around our East Brisbane school, we've got this beautiful community. And so I'm very protective of it. And that's why people sort of say all the advocacy stuff I've been doing, oh, you know, what do you care about this little private school, little public school? I'll move it down the road, get over it. It's way bigger than that, right? It's this community thing that you just can't buy, and this idea that you can just pack us up in a box and move us to another suburb and everything will be fine. No. So this is why we continue to argue that the area needs to have a school. And look, I'm not anti-Olympics. I'm not anti-sport. I'm a typical bogan Aussie male. I love my sport, love my footy and everything, right? But priorities, right? Am I so desperate for a shiny new 50,000 seat stadium that I'd say, yeah, spend billions, knock down the school, knock down the park. I really want that stadium. No. We can have other alternatives. We can do things in a more modest way. It's a little bit like, to me, you go and buy a car and the sales rep shows you the latest shiny Ferrari, Lamborghini, whatever. It says, isn't it pretty? Surely you want this. This is what the government's doing with us now with these pretty pictures of the Gabba. Isn't it going to look pretty? How could you not want it?
Just to put it in perspective, $335,000 per extra seat that they're going to build.
That's a pretty seat.
That's a house in the middle of a housing crisis.
I want it to be plated in gold for that.
So exactly this, and look, I mean, we could talk to the council members this afternoon about all the things we've tried to do in terms of trying to, you know, alert government, make people aware of the plight of this and do others. But I might kick over here first in terms of like, this is going to be the first, what they call new norm Olympics. Ostensibly, the new norm is something that the ISC cooked up in response to. Sorry, I'm going to be a little bit cynical. It's like on a Sunday afternoon, right? But look, it seems to me like it is a bit of an elaborate greenwashing exercise if we're going to be our most cynical. Olympics have historically been overrun in terms of costs since, like, you know, before time began. There've been very few Olympics that have actually been run at a kind of, you know, kind of break even point. Economic kind of claims that are made around what their lasting legacy are often never brought out in practice. There's been numerous studies I could quote, and we've done the work as our various advocacy groups around this. But in terms of other threats, right, we're already seeing like there's a school that's about to be closed in a growing inner city area. There's a park that's going to be annexed. What are the things? What are the little looming things in the tail do you guys think might be on this journey to 2032 as well? Is this going to be the worst of it, or do you think there's going to be other blowouts, or where do you think maybe some of the sticking points, if I could press you there first? In terms, you were mentioning, and I was really interested to come back to this point, Michelle, around the displacement of disadvantaged or low-income folk, right, and seeing those forces of gentrification. We are acutely concerned that in our area, as you well know, that area has a lot of social housing already. We see there's 40 language groups at a school of 300 children. You have children coming in from various, you know, migrant and refugee families as well.
A lot of people who don't have cars.
A lot who don't have cars, right? So the option for them to walk to school does not exist anymore. So those kids, I worry, will basically become truant and won't actually even necessarily be able to attend a school because they simply do not have access to a school. What are some other things that we need to be aware of, perhaps, in the lead up to the Olympics?
Well, I think it expands well beyond schools and parks, which are obviously very important things because they are the centre of communities. I think it's going to have a massive impact on transportation, which is really poor in Brisbane, as we know. Traffic, all of those kinds of things. Community organisations. So the thing is, when anything's resumed by government, government is always going to pick the cheapest option. So things like community housing is generally owned by a not-for-profit or it is owned for government. So that's always going to be the cheapest thing for us to take rather than a strip mall or a private residence. So it's going to put all those pressures on it. It'll be interesting to see, is this going to fuel the cost of property? Because as soon as, we know there's this huge pressure for people to get housing at the moment, to either buy property, to rent, all of those kinds of things. Lots of people are going to be Airbnb during that period of time. So that means in that preparation, that rental stock's going to come off of the market as well. So I think what we're going to see, and I'm really sorry to say this, but I think it's going to get very boring. They're going to be quite boring communities to live in, because interesting communities have children in them who go to school, they have elderly people, they have people with disabilities, they have a mixture. That's what makes, when you go travelling, you go to an amazing, interesting city and it's fun because it has diversity of people. But when we make areas inaccessible for people or expensive, they become boring. And I'll give you an example, Boundary Street in West End. Since West Village has opened up, that's really changed the character of that street. And if I go to that shopping area at the end there, it's very controversial development, I see a lot of people spending money, but I don't see a lot of homeless people. I don't see a lot of Indigenous people. Everybody's wearing shoes. But if I go to the other end of Boundary Street, it's changed that dynamic, that sort of gentrification. And so where is the interesting part of that street to be? Where is the cohesive part to be in that street? So that's really
the beigeification
Yeah.
of our societies, right?
Yeah.
And I completely agree, Michelle, right? That I've lived in Brisbane, and I came from Melbourne, not Sydney, right? So at least I came from a better city when I came up there. But no, I agree with the point of, I remember when I moved, I was living in Hawthorn, in the city kind of Melbourne. But still 5 k's from the city, right? Which is wild when you think about how condensed Brisbane is as a city. And maybe this is a question I'll ask you, Nick, in terms of Brisbane's characteristics and what makes it unique in terms of its urban density and that profile. There's I noticed, people would talk to each other at the street light, right? You don't just strike up a conversation with the person standing next to you. But in Brisbane, that's pretty commonplace, right, to do that. And I've witnessed the change in West End that you described, right? Going down there in those early years, because I lived on Highgate Hill, it was a vibrant, diverse community, whereas now it is basically just beige and white. It is largely full of rich middle upper class people living in the apartments that are built there because it's a particular kind of apartment for a particular kind of inner professional. And those shade on anyone who has to live in West End or is an inner city urban professional. But you need the diversity, right? To make that, and even those buy into that, and it's not going to be electronic gentrification, but that makes it a less desirable place to live eventually, right? Because it becomes so boring and beige, right? So it kind of becomes a defeating endpoint. But maybe I come to you, Nick, in that, what's unique about Brisbane, you think, that potentially we're going to see more of these friction points with the Olympics coming up?
Yeah, thank you. Kind of go with the main concern. One of my main concerns is we'll become less livable, right? So that means many things, but it is good community. It's relatively affordable compared to other places. Definitely homogenous groupings in an urban residential area is never good. You kind of say you don't want a whole thing of lawyers when someone says you don't want too much community housing in an area. And that's even just you need a large percentage of it spread out. So there's a lot of people involved in that, and it's not just this small percentage. That's when you have all the issues, right? It's the lowest socioeconomic in a really small spot, and that's what it is. If you widen that open and then spread it out more, you address a lot of it. And so basically one of the things I kind of harp on about is there's a lot of people moving here, that's just going to be happening, rather than just freaking out about where to put them and how to house them. If we really focus, what do we want a potential lifestyle and their sort of choice and agency, and to be able to actually shape the communities around it. I think that's really think about 2-3 decades out and where you want to be, and use this as a 10-year check-in with extra spend on infrastructure, kind of going towards that. We hear discussions about just I mean, are we going to cannibalise the tourism industry from Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast? If you take the Queensland sort of perspective, we have so much space here that is desirable from like an international tourism thing, with the whole, sustainability and the carbon that is bringing people here. They just are. I mean, that's part of the climate positive Brisbane Olympics and Paralympics, is we're just not including any flights that come here. That's just like out of scope, which is just kind of ridiculous to start with. But it's like, make it good for people while they're here. But my main sort of thing is like, anyone that wants to move here, like definitely welcome them in, find a good place, a sustainable, accessible, affordable place for them to live. But yeah, we don't want to ruin Brisbane and make it more like a Sydney, because that's like a real risk if we don't do it, if we don't manage growth sustainably and kind of lose what's great about Brisbane. There's quite a few people that are in these town planning sort of spaces that they like want to talk about, being a world city that's the same as Paris or something like that. And people, literal quote, someone was like, yeah, but like people, well, Tokyo and Paris, like they don't care about the beaches, we just need to be more like them. Like the way you basically phrase that, you don't kind of understand what's good about Brisbane and South East Queensland as is. So yeah, basically we could lose the identity and what's good about it.
Yeah. Melissa, I might come to you and then I'll throw to Austin. In terms of taking us back to the current fight for Raymond Park for this Brisbane State School as well, what are some of the things you think have been most effective in terms of so far raising attention and interest in the issue? And what are some of the strategies and tactics that you've been employing as like Friends of Raymond Park today? I mean, there was a quite significant, I think, concession made by government, kind of backtracking on previous plans for house resumption. But I mean, obviously you treat that with some degree of scepticism. I mean, we wait until the borders roll in, right, until we see what is final there. But what do you think has led us to that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started the Friends of Raymond Park Facebook page in order to get the community together so that we could share information as and when we received that information, and we could rally the community together. And it's been one of the great things about it has been the community getting together and friendships being made through it. So that was really positive. But the government always said there was going to be an 8-lane track. It is a requirement for international athletics competitions that you have an 8-lane track as a warm-up track. So we overlaid that initially on what was Raymond Park, and you could see the pure destruction of the park and the houses on the park. We have rallied a lot with the media, and fortunately the media have been on our side because, oh my goodness, you're going to get rid of houses in the middle of a housing crisis. So we absolutely monopolised on that. We did try and bring the communication away from just the housing to the impact on the mental health and well-being of our community in losing a park. But they tended to take those bits out and only put in the bits of my neighbour who's been in his house for 72 years, who is going to be displaced from that. So, that brings great headlines, right? So we had a change.org petition at the start. That gained over about 3,300 petition signatures, which was great. Our local, state and federal members, we've been really lucky to have members who have been advocating for us. They have been out there talking about it. They've mentioned it in Parliament. They've mentioned Friends of Raymond Park. In the federal election, we asked Kerry, Olivia and Max, who were the 3 representatives going for their seat, to come and advise our community on what they were going to do if they got in. Max was the only one who said that he would stand up and advocate. The others said that it was a state government issue, and whilst they were sympathetic to our argument, there was nothing they could do. Needless to say, Max got in. And Max has been very, very vocal at Parliament in making sure that the federal government understand what the impacts are of making this decision. Our quick win and our first win was the fact that the federal government have distanced themselves from their funding of the Gabba rebuild. They've said, oh, we want ownership of a stadium, which the stadium they want ownership, there's a whole other issue about dropping in a pool on top of Roma Street and then taking it out afterwards, and what the legacy of that is, instead of investing in, an Olympic pool. But that's a whole other.
Stay in the city, because there aren't actually any usable pools in Brisbane City, right?
Well, it may, but if it does, that leaves a positive legacy. If they just pull it out, what are we doing? We're putting in one of the most expensive stadiums to drop in a pool to take it back out. So the fact that the federal government have distanced themselves from the Gabba rebuild was a little win for us. In addition to that, we started a parliamentary petition, which now has over 3,300 signatures. We've got a lot on Facebook. We've had a community event in the park where it brought all the community together, family events and things. So, and we've been writing lots of letters, and obviously those letters take 3 months to come back, and then they will tell us nothing. They've been saying from the start that there was no resumptions. The 8-lane track was what they were doing, but it will fit in. In February, we got the media involved, and I sent the questions to the media to ask the questions of Stephen Miles. Stephen Miles finally admitted that there was budgets for resumptions in the park, and that there would be. What he said was a small impact to a small number of people, and what I think he meant was a massive impact to a small number of people, without even taking any consideration into the impact of the local residents that aren't actually sitting on the park, that use that space. So we've been advocating through, and with the support of our, we're kind of lucky, we've got the Greens at every single level, but irrespective of what party they are, I would like to say that the members who have been elected in our communities are ones that are supporting us and actually doing what they've said that they would, and representing our community into it, which is quite rare actually for that. So all of those things have led up to the petition. I got banned from Facebook about the week before they flipped on the housing, because I was sharing our petition to everybody that said $2.7 billion is a ridiculous amount of money. Isn't it? Here's our petition. Apparently that's against community rules on Facebook, but that was enough to give us our second win, which was that they have gone public with the fact that they will not be resuming houses, and that they will only build a 4-lane track. We're not happy with that. That's not the outcome we want. But there's 2 small wins as part of our advocacy for the last 2 years.
May I just quickly, on a few of the points, from a town planning perspective, I think with the Gabba, say it is going to go ahead, if it does likely, I think essentially we should incorporate the warm-up track into the Gabba. So essentially maybe you have it drop down a few levels under, because you don't necessarily need that much height. You could kind of get it in there and have that. And maybe Raven Parks for some track warm-ups, field event warm-ups. So temporary use, that's I think a much more sustainable approach to it. Brisbane Live, essentially I think we don't actually need that much seating around an Olympic-sized pool for most of the time. That's a pretty established sort of practice of a drop-in pool into a large stadium. I think that is actually probably a pretty good way to do it, because it's just going to be so much more useful of that infrastructure. Then the school too, I think they should just 100% incorporate the school into the massive redevelopment of the area. Yeah. They're doing that whole priority development area, state run everything, just incorporate the local school into that.
We'll take it on to this meeting with Grace, right? She can show the fist at you like she has the committee. No, literally in the meeting she was banging the table and shaking her fist at the committee. She said she will deny that, if you ever say it. So, yeah. Austin, do you want to, Nick raised a couple of interesting points, and off the bat, like, what do you think in terms of next steps for EBSS and where to from now? Now that the government a couple of weeks ago announced the establishment of a new school in Coorparoo, I think, we as a community discuss this, keeping those two separate. I mean, East Brisbane State School is East Brisbane State School. If they want to build a new school in Coorparoo, fine, right? And residents of Coorparoo want a new school in their area, then the government, new school, great, no worries. But that still doesn't meet the needs of East Brisbane State Schools. So what are some of the things that are coming down the line?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot going on. So I think where we've had a little bit of traction and the message we really want to get to people is we're not just sort of this hopeless, sentimental, hug a tree type stuff. This is grounded in practicality for us as local residents and for Queensland taxpayers, right? Is that regardless of how you feel about the Olympics, regardless of how you feel about the school, if you've got no connection to the school, as a Queensland taxpayer, am I happy to spend $3 billion, call it that, to demolish a stadium, lose a school, lose a park, when there's other options available? And this is what we're trying to pitch, right? This is not just a hopeless sentimental thing. This is about saying, well, hang on, what are the pros and cons here? What are the other options? Let's get into realities and practicalities and that sort of thing. So, and that argument sort of got a bit of traction with some of the more conservative media that initially maybe thought we were just kind of troublemakers, just trying to cause a problem for the government. And they realised, well, hang on, actually, no, when you look at the costs and the benefits, and it's a little bit like what I was saying before with the new car analogy, right? If the sales rep shows you the latest, fanciest, prettiest sort of car, do you straight away go, yeah, I'll buy it, that looks great? Of course you don't. You go, okay, well, looks good. But what are the costs? And you go through, was it cost in dollar terms? How does it suit my family? How does it suit my ability to get to work? What's the insurance going to cost? That sort of thing. So you don't just go, what's the benefit? You go, what's the cost and the benefit? And you weigh it up. And you go, actually, that's not the best option for me. And that's what we're trying to say with this GABA project, okay? It's not just, rah, 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 don't do it. You're all bastards, shut up, bro. It's, hang on. We don't think this is the best option for the people of Queensland. And you weigh up the cost, the billions of dollars, the loss of community assets, the carbon footprint, all that sort of stuff. We can do this better. So guys sort of alluded to before, there's a perfectly good athletics track at the Queensland Sport Athletics Centre. We had a very successful athletics track at Carrara for the Commonwealth Games. There's other athletic facilities in places like Chandler and Albion. There's other options here, right? And one thing we've repeatedly said to government and our local members said to government is, where's the business case for the GABA? Show us why this is the best option. They haven't provided it. They've promised it for about 12 months now and they haven't provided it.
Because it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
Right. It was a back and forth. So it was a $1 billion announcement, and then it became a $2.7 billion announcement. They're kind of, if a business case exists, it's a coaster. I thought you were at an hotel somewhere, right? I'm gonna open up for questions because I realize we've got 25. You've got a few in the room. Marcus put his hand up first, but I'm not going to go to you first, Marcus, because like you're.
Can I quickly just ask because just a clarification? Yes, I do have a microphone. What is the reason then? Can you speculate? I mean, obviously, in all of these cases that we've heard today, and then some. If we can't easily make sense of something that is in the public domain, there's usually something else going on. In most cases, there is something else going on. So is it that there's developers that will benefit, obviously they will. Have you already come across anything from whistleblowers, people inside the convention centre doing the party right now? I mean, obviously, there must be something behind it.
The GABA, what is it? The GABA group, obviously the GABA Trust won a new stadium, right? So there's the GABA Trust behind it, but there's the optics. There's the viewer flying over the GABA and seeing the CBD, right? So let's showcase Brisbane to the world. Yeah. Don't worry that you're going to destroy the heart of it, but as long as the optics are there, because it's all city views, so you can see the city from the GABA.
Yeah, Austin, you were part of this one?
Yeah, so mate, I think, as silly as it sounds, I really think there is a jealousy aspect, because people look at Melbourne and the MCG is quite close to town. Adelaide's got their new Adelaide Oval, the Perth Stadium is quite close to town, and there really is an attitude amongst people in government and in sport in this country that go, well, they've got a stadium in the city, we should have one too. And I don't mind having a stadium in the city, but it's got to fit within the footprint. They've got totally different geography in those cities. The MCG's been there since 1860 or something, so the space was there. And hey, it'd be great if we had that kind of space in Brisbane, but we don't, so we have to work with what we have. So,
and we care more about the rectangular sports generally.
Yeah.
I think you just like kind of sell your soul to the IOC, and then you have to do shit like this that you don't want to otherwise do.
Yeah, that's it.
I just totally do not get it. There is no sense. Your car analogy is much more about, okay, you've got 3 cars, we're going to refit this one, we're going to refit that one, we're going to refit that one, then we're going to refit that one back. It just doesn't make any sense at all. This is being proposed as climate positive. I haven't seen anything that says it's going to be climate positive or about changing behaviours. It's really just reinforcing the same kind of decision making. Have you considered taking this up to the IOC, making it an international campaign? Because I think dealing with it locally really won't work. It's really challenging that whole idea that this is in no way a climate or socially positive event.
Yeah, it's something that has come up in both the academic assurance health, come up in that. Yeah, exactly this, right? The new norm is meant to produce Olympics which are less about destruction and massive carbon footprints and more about sustainable design, reusing existing and such. The most cynical thing the state government have done through this whole process is they are considering the fact that they're maintaining the foundations of the GABA, that it's a refit, right? It's not a new stadium, right? They are reusing it's like this is a ship, right? Everyone knows that this is ship, the kind of like idea of once every plank of the ship is replaced, is it still the same ship, or is it, that or the axe where if you replace the handle and you replace the head, is it the same axe? The Gabba Stadium is basically Queensland's thesis is the stadium, right? At the end of it, it will be an entirely new stadium, but they'll maintain it is a rebuild. So again, it's greenwashing, right? And it's spin of the idea of reutilising an existing facility. And I'm personally, it's not for me to say, it's for a committee. Not convinced the IOC have much sympathy, right? Let's look at FIFA, let's look at IOC, let's look at these organisations. But yeah, the public campaign, absolutely. So one of the things we're looking at is can we get, say, athletes themselves on board? Can we start to kind of get other figures to kind of come out and support and say, hang on, am I going to feel comfortable running down the 400 metres when I know that there are a bunch of kids that now don't have a local school and there's a park that doesn't exist anymore and there's hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 in the atmosphere from embedded carbon in a concrete stadium that doesn't exist anymore, all those kinds of things, and getting athletes or others involved. That is something that I think both have considered.
Just to add to that, was it the president of the AOC?
The liquor paint, right?
Just said that the Gabba just needs a liquor paint in order for the Olympics to be there. So
should have seen the speed doctors come around it, right?
Literally within maybe 2 hours, the statement was withdrawn. But on top of that, if we want to talk about the athletics track, generally and in most stadiums around the world, the athletics warm-up track is within the same facility. So generally that's within 400 metres. Raymond Park at its closest point is at least 800 metres to one entry side of the Gabba. So you're talking about having to potentially bus competitors down there because they're not going to, you're talking about Paralympics as well, right? So
which
a 4-lane track,
zone too,
Paralympics.
It's not just as is, put people on a shuttle. It's like that whole area is locked down for safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally locked down.
Yeah, so community pride and after Olympics. Yeah.
So is anybody else here in Utopia?
Yes.
Oh, mate, you want to see our thread?
Yeah.
We've got a WhatsApp thread as a group, and it's like every episode that comes out of Utopia, I almost can't. I really enjoyed that show up until now, and I can't watch it because it's like it's too real. Like, it's
No, don't.
May I quickly go that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was first.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, it's going by the microphone. So let's go with Nick, and then the person who's got a microphone, and I'll come to you.
Yeah.
Just kind of wrapping up the climate positive. Essentially, it doesn't mean much at all. And they kind of do that by design. They kind of say this, it sounds good. People kind of conflate with carbon positive. It's not even necessarily that. And essentially, we're going to define what it is. So we're going to meet it. And so we will be a climate positive game. So it's quite a fast.
My question is for Michelle and Nick. I'm really concerned about the effect that the Olympics generally is going to have on Brisbane City, and I've lived in Brisbane, so I'm not coming from elsewhere. But we do have a certain flavour to Brisbane that is quite separate from Melbourne, Sydney, and certainly Paris. And I mean, most of our buildings, our older buildings, our heritage buildings, have been destroyed. We haven't got much left. And, you know, in the next 10 years, I'm just wondering how much will be destroyed. I mean, you look over at West End and it's very sad. It's not even good architecture. Any comments on that in terms of?
What I'm really worried about is that a lot of the infrastructure is all going to be about the Olympics. And so if you look at, say, the public transport that's been suggested, that's all, and it's going to be great. Isn't it going to be great to have like an underground in Brisbane or to have more bus? Like, all those things are great, but most of us, including myself, we don't live in the inner city. And will we benefit from that, or are we just going to be engaged in more construction or paying our rates and our taxes for those things in the inner city? And how is that going to impact? Is this going to be taking money away from building affordable housing, from our healthcare system, from building, like we could have, if they want to resume the school in East Brisbane, okay, build another school in East Brisbane. We can afford to do that. We are a very rich economy. There's space to do that. So it's just, I think it's an excuse to not be funding things that we need in our society. That's my concern.
Well, you should definitely put new housing and all that sort of stuff around the transport. Because, yeah, that's like a fundamental user infrastructure sort of approach.
Yeah.
So while
in doing that, I mean, you've got a good building there, quite apart from the school being there. There's a heritage building there.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, you can talk about building new houses and infrastructure, but in doing so, it's just resumption.
like Suncorp incorporates a graveyard on site. Like Suncorp has a graveyard on site somewhere.
Yes.
Like, why can't you incorporate those into it?
They have said that they're going to maintain those buildings, though, and
that's true.
incorporate it as part of the plan.
Yeah, it's hard to
Pineapple Hotel.
Yeah, it was hard to consider here because what they're trying to do is like, yeah, heritage buildings, a lot of people are concerned about those. So they turn around and say, no, we're not going to use them, like, it won't be a school anymore, but we'll keep the buildings. And that, the idea there is they feel that I think that implicates a certain kind of population. You go, oh, okay, that's sad, it won't be a school, but oh, the beautiful buildings will still be there. One of the former PNC presidents, Nikki Middleton, who is still very much part of our struggle to fight here, she's an architect, and she says quite rightly, its utility as a school is wrapped up in its heritage, right? So you cannot consider it still maintain its heritage value and significance when its use as a school is no longer, right? So that's part of it too, is understanding heritage. It's not just about, oh, that's a pretty old building we have. It's that that's a pretty old building where you can see kids coming and going every day and using that as a school in the middle of the community. And a lot of that, like into some of Michelle's points and Nick's as well, I think that we have to kind of have a consideration here in this moment where we're going to be going through all these kind of moments of gentrification and updating a lot of the urban fabric, that what is the use and utility of some of the structures and spaces we have? And in any of these moments, are we going to maintain their use for community in those ways? Or are we going to bulldoze at the top of that and say, well, oh, that's still green space, or that's still public space, but now it's concreted over public space with just a bunch of expensive restaurants and such, which is not a space that fulfills the needs of the community, say, which used to go to that space with picnic rugs and bring their own food and enjoy that space in a slightly different way. So I think that's part of it too, is that, that cynicism of we'll keep the buildings, it won't have the same value in it.
Two questions here.
Yeah.
Quick comment. The AFL and Cricket Australia said some time ago that the redevelopment would have no benefit for them. Secondly, I gather that this is mainly a state government issue. State government's going to be under some pressure at the election at the end of next year. So what sort of a campaign? I gather from what you say that the redevelopment is not a fait accompli at the moment. What sort of campaign do you have in mind up to the next state election?
Yeah. So some of the things and I'm happy for you guys to jump in here as well. Actually, Austin, you go first.
Okay. But just Peter, thanks for that. Just for reference, we have written to both cricket and AFL to just open the dialogue. They won't respond to our queries, so I couldn't tell you exactly how complicit they are because they won't talk to us. So in general, though, we continue to believe that the Gabba project is not in the best interest of Queenslanders, and that's the message we keep going with. So we will, this is so much to sort of unpack here, I suppose. It's a combination of, we've got a parliamentary petition going. We continue to talk to media agencies, whether it's print media, radio or TV or whatever, with updates on what we're doing. And we continue to have open dialogue with whichever politicians want to talk to us. As what I sort of mentioned before, is we're not there to burn the house down. What we want them to do is come and talk solutions where we can say, hey, why not consider this option if we think it's a little bit better? So we certainly plan to keep on going as a community, putting the idea out to Queenslanders. This is not the best option. We can come up with a better option for our Olympics. So we'll just keep talking. We'll keep writing. We'll keep mediating. We'll do whatever, and clever people like Dan will look at the carbon footprint and things like that. Other clever people will do YouTube, and so it's a multi-factored.
Yeah. Sort of and I think if I can just jump in here off the back of Austin's comment, the feeling we're getting as the campaign continues to press on is that we feel that the Queensland government have actually seriously underestimated this and the appeal of the Gabba project, particularly. It's come in the middle of an economic crisis, a housing crisis, the old kind of bread and circuses of the big shiny Olympics, this exciting thing. I think they've just misread the room on this one.
Yeah.
And part of that is in my research around media transformation and some of the ways in which social media and news are kind of largely decoupled now, and that is that they're an old school government, right, who rely on old school methods for opinion polling, for kind of reading the mood, and they're just not reading this one correctly. And that I do feel like with continued, as these campaigns wage on and it continues to be a presence within the nightly news bulletin, until here we have the department come out with the news of Cooperoo, and they wanted us to do the full consultation and all the initial design in 5 weeks for the new school, right? So they've basically given us a deadline of the end of this term to come up with all the big ideas for this new school that they're going to shut us down to. And we're incredulous that we weren't just openly excited and accepting of, they're about to spend $100 million on a brand new school for you. Aren't you excited by this? You get to have a say and do all this. And it's like that there's a fundamental disconnect here, I think, between the truth makers, right, in government and us as a community and our real feelings and wants and desires on the ground, right? That they are just so clearly out of touch with this one. And I think, leading into the election, maybe, we're trying to make this the number one issue of the next election. And want every community to kind of like either group. I know everyone, and we've heard all the issues here today that other people have, but I think this is ground zero because of the climate impact, the kind of, impacts of gentrification, of what this does to the fabric to fundamentally change and transform Brisbane in a way that we don't think for the better. This is going to be issue number one, and I think it's going to be, that election is going to be a referendum on the appeal of the Olympics and the blank check approach to Olympics of just spending money, good money after bad, building white elephant infrastructure.
Just to add to that, David Crisafulli, I wrote to him probably a year ago, and he said his role was to keep the government to account, but did not actually come out and say that he would support us. Only a few weeks ago, the deputy opposition leader came out and said that that this shouldn't be a decision for politicians, that they would put together an inquiry and an independent group to make the decisions on whether the Gabba redevelopment comes ahead. So we've come one step. I mean, we actually want them to come out and say that they'll scrap it if they win, but slow steps.
I suppose I really resonates with me about even when they actually when they decided to go for the Olympics, and it was like during the middle of a pandemic. And I just thought that was just insane, because I'm sure lots of countries around the world were going, oh, we wouldn't do it because of what happened in Japan. It didn't make any sense. But probably for me, one of the things I'm confused about, and I get my information from the ECA. So last week I'm at the ECA and I speak to the people doing the 2032 Olympic thing, and I sort of say, okay, legacy. What is the definition of legacy? Because they're coming out and they're saying to me that the legacy strategy is due for release in late 2023. And I said, what is legacy? Because how can a legacy be an equestrian event at Victoria Park? You're not going to have horses there long term. And they gave me a very vague definition of what legacy was. It could be like, and it didn't actually translate to use of it long term for that particular purpose. So I think that's one of the things to look at. I think it's a very loose, very convenient level of communication in terms of these things. And I said to them, well, why wouldn't you put, if you're thinking about legacy for equestrian, why wouldn't you put it out somewhere at Brookfield where they might need it, or Sanford? But I think it's exactly what you're saying about the optics. And I think it always goes back to Barcelona 1992, the diving over the city, because we all remember that. So I think they've got horses prancing around. I look at Brisbane City in the background. So that's where I think I'm at with that. But it's the same issue, because there is probably no legacy for that particular event at that. There is no legacy.
Yeah, and look, as a comp scholar, I completely agree with you on the kind of media angle of it, right? That a lot of this is being engineered for that broader comms media. Like, I can just think of like the hundreds of them sitting in one willy, right? The media advisors going like every day, like think of the pictures, think of the drone footage, think of this, right? That it does. It kind of the instant gratification of the whole urban environment and space. And it's a thing that's gone through the day, right? We live in Mowbray Park, right, which you recently had all the fairy lights get thrown up in the trees there. And it's Instagram for it, right? It's basically for it so people can go there, take pictures of the pretty lights and post to social media and that. It's that kind of, ephemeral kind of fleeting moment glimpse in it. And it's not about actually that sustaining on and being like less glamorous out, somewhere else. I think Brookfield would be amazing for something like that, right?
I think that's where you would put it. And it's actually Sanford, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, right? But that idea, I think the people in the positions of power and thinking around this are the people you don't want choosing the paint colours for your house renovation, let's say that, right? They're the people that choose Comic Sans for your poster, right? They're not people who've got a real eye for what would actually make this cool, right? What, like, urban, like, Brisbane's like early punk scene, Brisbane's grittiness, right? You think about what makes Brisbane distinctive and genuinely cool. This is not any of that, right? It is the kind of like beigest attempt at running a world-class event that you can imagine, and it is deeply uncool, right? And so that's why they're not doing those things.
Can I answer the question?
Yeah,
So even just the politicians, right? It was, I mean, in the works for many years before COVID. It just kind of happened to be at that time. Basically, no one else really wanted it. A few like lower tier cities like India and China kind of wanted it. We were kind of preferred ones. We worked with them, and it kind of, if we weren't actually there, the IOC maybe would have had to do more towards this new norm. So one of my concerns is we actually were kind of a bit of a scapegoat where they didn't have to change as much as they otherwise would have needed to. There are now a lot of other cities that want it next time, which kind of undermines what I think is actually what we really should be doing. Like it's going to happen here 2032. I think it should also be here 4 years later. Basically, all our infrastructure will still be good. It'll be that quality, and basically make it a 4-year sort of sporting celebration type thing. And I think that should be the new norm. Is just like two years, hosting it twice. And yeah, essentially the politicians are getting credit for it now without needing to be accountable to it. They can kind of just say things, and they're not going to be around in the same positions. It's not going to be the same politicians, same positions when potentially shit hits the fan in 2032-ish, and bit before, bit after. So yeah, they're just not accountable to it.
I would say though, don't lose hope, right? Because there's two reasons I say that, and one is because we've just seen Victoria cancel the Commonwealth Games, which like was such a ballsy move, you know.
But the athletes were like, "Oh no, we should keep it." So back to the one where it's like, "Will the athletes be the ones changing it?"
Well, they're a more population, and we are a bigger population. Not that there's a problem with athletes, but the other thing is that younger people are much more aware of all this greenwashing. I teach environmental justice to a lot of young people, and this Olympics is not going to stand up. The test of time is not going. It's not going to be in our favour. People are going to be really, really on the nose about these ideas in another 5, 8, 10 years' time. So I think to be clever, they really need to be considering a lot of the suggestions you're putting forward. I can't believe all this idea about these new builds when we just had Commonwealth Games not long ago. This just blows my mind. I can't fathom it. We have these great facilities. Why are we not using them? And why don't we have the vision to highlight what a great area this is to be in without just a simplistic drone shot that goes on Instagram. The world's going to be moved on from drone shots on Instagram in 8 or 10 years' time.
Anastasia said, so we approached her right at the start because they literally changed athletics from Carrara to the Gabba 2 days before the submission. So she said it was too early to understand what the impacts to the park were when they actually put the park as the place to be. So I dare say that's replicated right across the planning of the event. And it just feels that they are now so pig-headed that that's what they said, that we're not going to change our mind because that would be a backflip. But why don't you listen to the people and do things and make decisions that are going to have a really positive environmental and economic impact that's going to have a long-lasting legacy of those pieces of infrastructure beyond the games.
Can I quickly go, Victoria Park, Barrambin is just like a good example of like this broader problems that are going to happen, where essentially got an amazing opportunity for an inner city park. It's like the same-ish size of Central Park in New York City, Manhattan. And essentially it was already kind of planned the way they wanted it to be. It's now going to be used for the equestrian cross-country. So they're going to make the park, the legacy of the park for the 10 years before and the many decades after, a little bit worse, because you're going to have basically just the way that the grass is and the arrangement and everything. It's just going to be a little bit worse for hundreds of thousands of park visits because they're trying to force equestrian.
Yeah, and we think they're putting it, like, there's got an administration building in there. That has to be Olympics related.
Oh, yeah.
Like, otherwise you just put it in the CBD. The park staff do not need to be in the park. And I look at it and I think to myself, if that was New Farm Park and someone put a building in it, there'd be an uproar.
Yeah.
But because it's a big park, people don't go there as much. It's a little bit out of the way.
But also because the Olympics, right? Yeah.
I'll try and keep it short.
Yeah.
Question that's directed probably towards Nick, but if anyone else takes public transport, they'll understand my reply. When I thought of the Olympics venues, the clearest ideas that came to me were QE2 and see in the sports centre in Chandler. And I just quickly looked it up. I think it's a 20-minute drive, but to take public transport, it's a little over an hour. It's like a cog in the spoke style of public transport back to the centre and then back out to Chandler. Is there any major transport in connection in suburbs planning for the Olympics, or is they trying to keep it all central like Gabba is because they understand how shit the public transport is in the suburbs?
So it is the approach of multi-centres, right? Rather than basically everywhere. Previously has done an Olympic precinct where you kind of have everything in there. Lord Mayor Schrinner, announced there'll be 100% car-free games, which essentially all the public will be able to access all of the venues without having a car. But in that same one, he talked about, coming from Hamilton in these water taxis that don't exist into the city, and didn't mention city cats. And part of it too is so the Redlands is going to be a hard one to get to out in the white water and everything. And essentially where I come to on this is we're going to connect it better, but even just having 100% target might not be the right thing. It can come up with random things. It might be actually most efficient to get 95, 97% accessibility to it or whatever, and that last 3% might cost twice as much. So the sort of things like if you have this absolute that you're going for, you're often going to do things that you otherwise wouldn't just to try and get that last little bit. So they're going to connect it better, and hopefully that is the sort of legacy of connecting it all. But yeah, there's rail duplication too, which is a big part of it all, and essentially acting Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast as basically places for people to stay and then come in and that sort of stuff. So they are trying to connect it all along the corridors.
I will add one and then we'll go to the last question, which is I do make that drive down to Chandler because I use the track for velodrome for cycling, and also my daughter does diving, springboard diving down there. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's in the middle of absolutely nowhere, right? It's just all of a sudden, boom, oh, hello, and Belmont shooting range right next to it. Public transport's an absolute nightmare out there because it's, in the middle of nowhere as well, and it's not well serviced.
So that's an argument for the Gabba to be the athletics venue.
So imagine if they spent the $2.7 billion on traffic or on transport infrastructure that would allow people to go to QE2 or out to Chandler.
There are tram lines, some of the way out there at least. Some people.
But they're spending it all in Cross River Rail and Brisbane Metro, which is happening, and then that's where they're putting all the venues. Yeah. So they're actually doing connecting the venues with public transport. Yeah. So rather than adding extra stuff, so they're connecting it all quite well.
Rather than connecting.
Rather than connecting places that you otherwise would want to connect.
I'm speaking. All right. I guess my concern with the Olympics is that we're very quickly heading towards a 1.5 degree world. I feel like we're due for at least another major flood or two before then. That probably may affect the literal state of the Olympic venues. So I don't know what the government has in plan if there's another major flood that wrecks a whole bunch of venue construction, etc. And then obviously I'm assuming it's going to be held in winter.
Yeah, July, August. So essentially when it doesn't flood currently. But
I guess I'm more thinking about in the lead up to the Olympics. Yeah. And I guess it's kind of good that it is in winter because it would be an unlivable Olympics if they held it in summer 2031.
Yeah, it's the Summer Olympics held in winter because that's the only way in which you can hold it in Brisbane because they will just fry on the tarmac.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it actually makes us a pretty good place for hosting it. Because that's the time of year they want to host it, and we happen to have a goodish climate at that time.
Okay, just expanding more broadly, do you have any thoughts about climate change in a 1.5 degree world within the scope of the 2032 games?
Yeah, it's not just floods, right? Those mountains out there, bushfires in Brisbane. It's also rain event. Well, we call them rain events. They're cyclones potentially that we're going to see hit the coastline here. So I don't know how you can't really prepare for those things because we don't know what's going to happen. But it's invariably one of those kind of weather events or climate change events is going to happen to us in the next 10 years. I don't know how much that is considered in the planning.
Yeah, the climate's changing. It's generally getting worse. Weather events are getting more extreme and more frequent. And it was something I actually wanted to bring up about the flight path that kind of came to mind. With basically the design of the built environment around Brisbane, we're going towards, well, subtropical design. It's what we celebrate. Basically, it's blending the outdoors and indoors, passive ventilation, those sort of things. That kind of gets undone in the hottest periods and when there's bushfires, right? So if you have terrible air quality and your passive ventilation, there's issues there. And it definitely isn't consistent with, I think it's probably a pretty good argument for the aeroplane flight path stuff. If we are wanting the character and livability of Brisbane to be this indoor-outdoor, focus on the outdoor lifestyle and everything, if you need to sort of seal up to protect yourself from the unlivable airport noise, that's just not consistent with what we want the built environment to be. So I think that could be a pretty good argument for, to throw it in with the health and sort of things.
Just quickly, climate change is right now creating huge floods in China. That's upsetting our supply chain. 10 years from now, what will that look like? And could you do the finances, as Victoria has done, and said, all right, government, toss up exactly how much this is going to cost us in 10 years' time? Because I doubt that they can. I don't know what things are going to cost us in 10 years. We have 9% protected areas. We're supposed to have 30 for land and sea. That's a promise from Tanya Kluber. Our Environment Minister has got 250 million. Frankly, it's a poke in the eye. When the Gabba's got how many million?
2.7.
It's vulgar.
Yeah.
Quickly, the problem is they'll come up with the numbers and show that it's an economic benefit for us. No matter, like, that's just what they'll do.
For national parks.
Yeah, it's just, that's what they'll do, and then we'll go on.
And they'll chunk it in as intangibles as well.
Yeah.
So this is the thing, they'll kind of go to there's a broader kind of like benefit, like it's civic pride. It's one of the things I often put on the ledger, right? And they put a dollar figure to civic pride. I'm sure there's going to be 500 kids from East Brisbane States who are going to have a lot of civic pride. They burnt down one wing there in a few years' time when the climate will start, right? Yeah.
I thought the climate wars were over.
Yeah.
The climate change point that people make is really good, and that is indirectly part of what we're saying at the school. It's another reason to be modest with the spending and with the developments, because apart from the dollar cost, apart from the impact on community, as you quite rightly point out, what if you 2.6 billion into a $2.7 billion project, and then you have a massive flood, then you have a massive fire, and you lose the whole lot of things. So yet another reason to utilise existing venues, be modest.
You could make the Gabba, if you were to do it all, you could essentially help the flooding events with the infrastructure. So the broadcasting thing, Karilpa, maybe there's some kind of flood mitigation thing. Gabba there in this low-lying area that does connect in with the networks, maybe there is some large stormwater detention, where if we are going to be spending 2.6 billion, you're not even shooting for neutral of its impact in flooding or something. Could we incorporate massive flooding mitigation measures into this massive redevelopment of a whole inner city?
It is in a swamp. Right?
And Raymond Park, every time there's a big flood event or rain event, fills up but drains fairly quickly, but it is the only thing that's protecting our houses, who are all in a very flat environment, from actually from flooding, right? So as soon as they start digging, Nicholas, you could probably answer, but as soon as they start digging and putting a metre deep concrete in order to support an athletics track, like what happens to all of that water?
Yeah, generally you want to hold on to it and slowly release it. So it's like you actually want to slow it down so it isn't just everything going into the main river at once.
That's it.
So make go over 3 days of release.
What happened at Flemington Racecourse, the classic one of this, right? If people were watching when Victoria had its floods recently, and basically this massive retaining wall that had been built that basically meant all the houses on the other side of that retaining wall got flooded, whereas the racecourse was fine. So,
or put housing in flooding zones because they go, that's an amazing undeveloped space.
Yeah.
But that's also why they kept the Raymond Park, and they haven't built on it. It's an inner city suburb. Hey, there's great. It's all got city views, but they can't build on it for that reason.
Yeah, there's no reason to be building on public land. And once you build on it, you never get it back.
Yeah.
So you really should just be going denser.
That is the biggest concern here.
Make
To
it
wrap up.
denser.
I mean, one of the things like in this is that legacy, and once they do take Barrambin Park, I think you're right, Melissa, that we ain't getting it back as a community, right? They'll build those things, and then there'll be isn't this nice, right? Yeah. Marcus, we got to wrap, hey?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, panel members, for all your thoughts and insights. Thank you so much to the audience for your wonderful contributions. A couple of plugs at the end, if I may, which is there are 2 petitions open at the moment. If you do search on the Queensland Government website, you find one for East Brisbane State School, find one for Save Barrambin Park. There's some other activities that both got Facebook pages if you want to follow the fight. Both communities are open for other volunteers. If you have an expertise or background in environmental planning, modelling, health, anything that you think you could use as an angle to fight this government and fight these developments, we would love to hear from you as both communities. Am I right in saying that? Both, yeah. These are long fought campaigns. They're exhausting, they're bruising, but they're ones which we need as many people on board as possible. So thank you so much, and thank you also for your expertise and insights as our academic experts on the panel. Thank you, Marcus.